Foreign Affairs Minister Vivian Balakrishnan said the keys to reconciliation and the solution to Myanmar's political and humanitarian problems lie within the country itself and in the hands of its people. In response to parliamentary questions on how ASEAN plans to address the turmoil in Myanmar, Dr. Balakrishnan said, quote, "There's a limit to how far external pressures will be brought to bear."
And I want to emphasize that my key objective, again perhaps influenced by my medical background, is first, do no harm. Do not raise false hopes, do not incite, and do not encourage further crystallization of disputes and violence. So I say all this so that Singaporeans, both within this house and outside this house, will understand that despite all our fervent and earnest hopes of reconciliation, the keys ultimately lie within Myanmar. And there's a limit to how far external pressure will be brought to bear. It doesn't mean we approve of what they have done and how they do it. And we are clear in our expressions of disapproval. But let us also be realistic and let us hope that good sense prevails.
Our Indochina Bureau Chief Tan Hui Yee joins me now. So, Hui Yee, off the back of what our Foreign Affairs Minister said on Myanmar, the country is facing heavy external pressure. For example, on Tuesday, ASEAN urged the Myanmar military to stop the violence, and yesterday, the US blocked the Ministries of Defense and Home Affairs and top military conglomerates as well from certain types of trade. How is the junta, though, reacting to these external forces?
From past experience, we know that the military regime is pretty impervious to Western pressure. If anything, the regime has become steadily more brutal and violent in its crackdown. Many protesters who died in recent days were shot in the head. And on Wednesday, we saw medical workers in Yangon forced to get out of the ambulance and kneel on the ground and basically bludgeoned on the head with rifle butts and other objects. It's unclear at this point what effect the US sanctions will have, because Myanmar's biggest trading partners are not in the West, but actually in Asia. They are countries like China, Thailand, Japan. Its top investor, as you know, is Singapore. And, ASEAN at this point can only apply diplomatic pressure, but not much else. The military regime has tried to paint the anti-coup protesters as rioters and anarchists. In a state-owned newspaper today, there was a report claiming that violent protesters were holding things like smoke grenades.
The UN Human Rights Chief yesterday cited the death toll of at least 54 people since the February 1st coup, with over 1,700 people arbitrarily arrested and detained. Despite the crackdown getting more violent, are you seeing more citizens joining the protesters? And the ones that are already in the protests, are they growing more fearful?
So the violent crackdown has done two things. It has reduced the size of the crowds, for sure. In the initial days after the coup, we saw families take children and grandparents out to join these protests, but now no longer. Yet the crackdown has made young people more determined to stay on the streets. What we are seeing in Yangon now are pockets of young people holding their own protests. Often they create these temporary barricades in their own townships to slow police down. And when police move in on them, they run away, only to re-emerge in other streets. The protests, I must maintain, are still largely peaceful, but the demonstrators have been carrying more protective gear because it's obviously very dangerous out there now. And they are also using creative means to slow down police, like sticking pictures of commanding Chief Minang Line on the road, because the soldiers don't want to step on a picture of their leader.
Right. Well, the detainment of Aung San Suu Kyi, a big reason why people are protesting in the first place. And another female figure has become a symbol among young protesters, 19-year-old Ma Tie Sin, who was shot in the head by security forces when she was protesting. So, Hui Yee, how have these two women influenced those, especially women, on the front lines of this movement?
There's been a lot of attention on these young, outspoken especially female protesters, who grew up during a period of rapid liberalization when political expression was flourishing. In a sense, they symbolize the kind of future that Myanmar people might have had if the generals had not tried to turn back the clock with this coup. Aung San Suu Kyi, meanwhile, is a symbol of resistance against the military to many people. In any case, what's clear about the anti-coup movement now is that the regime's violence is hardening attitudes quite rapidly. Just this week, I was speaking with a woman who insisted that I refer to the military as a terrorist group. The sense of grief and outrage at the violence seems to be drawing Myanmar society further and further away from the point where reconciliation is possible.
And Hui Yee, what can we expect or what should we brace for over the weekend?
I'm afraid there's just going to be a lot more violence and intimidation and mass arrests, and the death toll will rise. At the same time, we should look a bit further and keep an eye on where the economy is heading. The strike by both civil servants and private employees has crippled the banking system and basically brought much of the economy to a standstill. Cash is difficult to get hold of, so people are holding on to it. That will make the regime more vulnerable over time.